It's a beautiful day in Los Angeles. I was waiting till you wrote your 95th book to interview you.
Perfect timing.
I wanted to get to the right moment. We had a great chat backstage for the last while. We've been talking about some things, and I'll just dive into it. I've got some questions, and we can go deep on some of the topics here. Let's talk first about understanding what Dharma is. You begin by asking Gemini, an AI chatbot, and you're going to hear throughout this book, he's having these conversations with different AI chatbots. To give you the Buddhist, you asked this AI chatbot to give you the Buddhist definition, which offers 3 layers. Layer 1, Buddhist teachings, which give you, which you can use as a map. Layer 2, universal truth or the truth to the universe. And layer 3, everything else. To think of Dharma as the building blocks of reality. I love what you write. Your story is the life you're leading. Your Dharma is the life you're supposed to lead. Tell us more about Digital Dharma.
So everyone's heard about these 7 levels of consciousness and 7 centers of awareness. If you are interested in yoga, they are basically the 7 chakras. So the first chakra has to do with survival and safety, the second with sensual experience, the third with power and transformation, the fourth with love, belongingness, creative expression, intuition, and transcendence. So there is a dharma, which means purpose, to fulfill all these needs, be an extended hierarchy of needs. But ultimately, as you just mentioned, dharma is the life you're supposed to lead, which means you not only fulfill all your needs, but you're following, as Joseph Campbell said, you're following your bliss. There's no resistance to existence. When you have stress, it's you're resisting what's happening right now. So dharma is the best life possible. You fulfill all your needs, and then you transcend to what is called enlightenment. In Indian philosophy, there are 4 goals of life. Dharma is first. Artha is second. Artha is material success. So Indian philosophy doesn't apologize for material success or wealth or abundance. The third goal is kama, as in Kama Sutra, which means sensual delight with mindfulness. And the fourth is moksha, freedom from suffering. Dharma is the starting point.
Perfect. Well, to give everyone the model of how the book evolves, and at first I was listening to the AI chatbot and you in reading it, and I wasn't interested to hear from a computer, so I wanted to hear directly from Deepak Chopra. As you work through the book, you have this affinity to appreciating the conversations that happen that will unfold as we have this discussion today. But I want you to expand on how AI, just to set it up for everyone, how AI can help in this journey. You share with us daily motivation and affirmations, specific meditations throughout the book, help you visualize a goal in front of you, reliable insights, information about personal issues, and inspiration from a great lineage of sages, saints, teachers, and poets. So you pepper this throughout the book, and explain this a little bit more about how this works, what you've set up.
Okay, first of all, we must understand what AI is. How many people right now in the audience use AI? So it's being used a lot. Yeah. And AI, even though we call it artificial intelligence, it's not intelligent. Okay, it's a large database and has the accumulation of all of human knowledge, literally. And it's a large language system. Now, something very interesting, we were talking behind, and we just mentioned the name Yuval Harari.
Yes.
So he's a deep historian, but other people say the same thing. So 40,000 years ago, there were 8 or 9 different types of humans. Just like in the cat family, you have panthers and tigers and cats and leopards and cheetahs and lions. They're all part of a family, but they're different species. So up until 40,000 years ago, there were 8 kinds, or 8 or even 10 different kinds of humans. You've heard of Neanderthals, Floresiensis, etc., etc. And they all had a language, and the language was for either eating or sex or danger. Mating calls, danger calls, and food calls, because that's how we survive. And then and by the way, all animals have a language for danger and food and sex, because that's how they survive. And that's true of all the hominids too. But then one species, us, Homo sapiens, we created a language for stories, a narrative. Guess what the first stories were? Gossip. And guess what the big stories now are? Gossip. Okay, that's what
We're
makes
evolving.
money.
Yeah.
In Hollywood and all the magazines, etc. Who's sleeping with whom, who can be trusted, etc., etc. That was how we created what we call the human experience of the universe. So after we created narrative language, we created other language of money, which is exchange. In the beginning, it was you do this for me, I'll do this for you. Let's exchange what we do to help each other. Became inconvenient, so we had shells and later coins and later paper, and now money is digital and crypto and your Wall Street. But had we not created that language, there wouldn't be empires and colonialism and nation states. Then we created another language, latitude and longitude. It's all made up, it's all imaginary, okay? I'll meet you on Broadway at the corner of 56th and Broadway, whatever.
Well, that's more real than looking out of an airplane looking for longitude lines like we all did when we were kids. And
Yeah.
just don't appear.
So, you create these things and then you embed yourself and it becomes your reality. So we created the human experience through language. But now what do we have? We have narrative language, we have the language of biology, you have the language of physics, you have the language of astronomy, you have the language of mathematics, music. There's no human being who can access all languages. So we have these large language models which can access the entire database and knowledge that humanity has created over 40,000 years. You could be an Einstein or a Beethoven, but you can't get there, okay? So here is Aladdin in a lamp. You rub the lamp, genie wakes up
keyboard, yeah.
and says, what do you want?
Yep.
That's what AI is. You can access any contribution to humanity that humans have made for 40,000 years. So as a physician, I said, and what I've done over my life, I said, what's the best way I could use AI given the right prompts? There's a whole chapter there on how to do prompts. It's called The Art of the Prompt. And so I said, for me, the four most important things are meditation and self-reflection, number one. Number two, research assistant, but in my area. I don't want to do research on, say, mineralogy or whatever. So research assistant in my area. Number three, health coach, both for physical and mental issues. And number four, a spiritual guide. Because with the right prompts, I can harness not only the mind of Plato or Socrates or Parmenides or Pythagoras or Wittgenstein, the sages of the Upanishads. There's no guru on planet right now who can do that, okay? You have access to the wisdom of the ages. So those are the four things you'll find in this book. How to use it for reflection, meditation, mindfulness, and then how to research areas of health and well-being, longevity, health span.
And none of this is passive in the book. So you're having a conversation, and what you find is there's this layering that happens throughout your conversations with AI, where you can ask something, and I'm Mac-centric. I've not done enough ChatGPT, but it's all coming to our iPhone next year. But when I've seen people use it, the great tools, and I know you can do some of this online, is it's remembering where the threads are. So you can keep asking conversations, and you don't have to dumb it down to the next level.
There's one more thing I should tell them. So, if everyone here has an iPhone or a computer, if you go, and you don't need an app, you can just go on your browser and look for digitaldeepak.ai. It's my digital twin. And so, as I said, you don't need an app, it's free, digitaldeepak.ai, and then ask it a question. I can't sleep at night, I'm too stressed out, give me a meditation. And you can ask it in 4 languages right now: Hindi, English, Arabic, and Spanish. But next week in Chinese and all the other languages. And you'll hear me guiding you for whatever you need. And we just launched that 6 weeks ago. Over 100,000 people have already downloaded the, it's not an app, as I said, just the link. And so it's obviously working. So it goes with the book. You have the book, but you can also speak directly to my digital twin.
And you all drove across town to Culver City. You could have just gone online and done.
I could have, yeah. Actually, it now, because it speaks in so many languages, and it also updates itself automatically, because what they call a RAG model. So RAG stands for retrieval, augmentation, generation. So if anything I've said in the past which is irrelevant, it'll delete that. And
that's a tool we would all love to have.
And if it's relevant, then it'll update you automatically.
So let's talk about a big theme in the book too, is in your writings for 95 books, I'm sure, have been about evolving oneself and growing oneself as a person. So you write, turn to any ancient scripture and it points in a direction that can be distilled into one teaching. Transcend your story, evolve, go beyond who you think you are. Evolution is a never-ending story, embrace it. Well, here we are in California, beautiful sunny California. We're on the West Coast, and much of this resonates with this crowd, I'm imagining. But we live in a world that's very different from that, that's not trying to grow oneself and maybe not trying to evolve. How do we deal with that? How do we change things or have that conversation about a higher purpose?
Well, I'm guessing that everyone in this room is self-selected. They're interested in this.
Yes.
But I live in New York City, walk around and think to myself, how many people in New York City are surprised by their existence? How many of you are surprised that you exist? It's a great mystery, right? That we exist. And if we don't actually ask ourselves, what's the meaning of all this, Life is like a flash of lightning in the sky. It doesn't matter, you live 70 years, 100 years, but across the span of eternity or cosmic time, we're a flash. The Buddha said, lifetime is transient as autumn clouds. To watch the birth and death of beings is like looking at the movements of a dance. A lifetime is like a flash of lightning in the sky, rushing by like a torrent down a steep mountain. So our life is short, and before you know it, it's gone. And yet, everybody lives in a way that they're here forever, till something happens. Somebody in the family dies, somebody gets cancer, and then you start wondering, what is happening? Grief, and what happens to me after I die? Is there a divine entity, God or whatever? Does it care about me? There are 2 trillion galaxies right now, we are told, 700 sextillion stars. Our planet is not even a speck of dust in the infinity of space and time. People are now, astronomers are telling us, astrobiologists, that there might be 60 billion habitable planets just in the Milky Way galaxy. That's a frightening thought. Where do I fit in, So then this little thing that you can go on, or you can go on to my digital twin, and it'll do this search for you and give you all the information of what luminaries and thought leaders and scientists and philosophers and sages have thought about these things. And we are lucky to live in a time that we can access the greatest minds of humanity. So for me, this book is about waking up, from this so-called life that we sleepwalk into. And because we sleepwalk, and because we all have stories inside our head, our life is our story, basically. If I ask you, who are you? You'll tell me everything that's about you. Since the day you were born, you went to the school, this, that. It's a story. but what's behind the story? Is there a consciousness that transcends space and time? So for me, the personal motivation was to help. I've been on this quest for 50 years, waking up. If you don't wake up, then life has been totally meaningless. You haven't reflected, you haven't discovered who you are, you've just been bamboozled by social constructs. So this is a way to help people wake up, as it has helped me wake up.
It's great. That's well said. Except for the earth bashing part, where you got negative on the earth. I was worried about that part. So let's talk about human consciousness and the conversations we had. A lot of times when I'm prepping for this, I look forward to the half hour or so backstage. Like, we had a lot of informal conversations, and it's that human interaction. And so you write about the difference between AI and human consciousness, because I think we still view it as this machine sometimes for some of the people here. I do, let's say. The difference, writing, when two people are having a conversation, they're doing much more than exchanging words. They're tuning into each other's consciousness, offering glimpses into their inner worlds. And to me, it struck a chord for myself, for a lot of us who have kids. During COVID in the last 4 years, we had this period we were in with the endless Zoom calls and the working at home. And suddenly, the last year or two, if you've traveled the world, you can't go anywhere because everyone's everywhere. Everyone's getting out. Humans are connecting again and reconnecting. You travel the world and you teach and see things. Are you heartened by this? Do you feel that's a reality, that people are back to talking?
So nothing replaces human connection. And what has happened is that we are more connected today, but at the same time more lonely.
Yeah.
And what happened during COVID especially, I found out that suicide has become the second most common cause of death among teens. And every 40 seconds, somebody is dying from suicide. And our children were holed up, our teenagers not going anywhere. So I created an emotional chatbot, actually, through AI. And it was based on 3 things: attention, deep listening; affection, deep caring built into the chatbot; appreciation, noticing that everyone's unique; and radical acceptance of everyone. And we started engaging with people who were depressed, but particularly teens. Guess what? 25 million conversations happening simultaneously. There's no group of therapists that can do that. Text messages going back and forth. 6,000 suicide ideations intervened, okay? And the kids were more, thank you. And the kids were more comfortable talking to this little machine than to a therapist, because first of all, they didn't feel judged. Secondly, it got to know them. So even Digital Deepak, if you ask me a lot of questions, get to know you, and then if you link it to one of these gizmos that measures your heart rate, sleep, and all that, it will get to know you. So the chatbot would ask, "Hey, Lucy, what did you have for dinner last night? Did your boyfriend call you back?" And all of that actually alleviated the depression. Mm-hmm. So, we have a tool now at our hands which doesn't replace human connection. Mm-hmm. But once you get this feeling that I can connect, it enlarges the ecosystem. So now we have created online and offline communities, and we call them Never Alone. Check it out, neveralone.love.
Never Alone.
And you can join the community either to ask for help or help others.
That's great. Congratulations on that. It's really great to hear. Another component for all of us here is understanding self-awareness. And you asked ChatGPT for a list of certain qualities, which included reflection, open-mindedness, empathy, adaptability, clarity of purpose, and effective communication. I was excited because I felt like I had a lot of these attributes, and I should say there were a few other quizzes in the book I didn't do so well on, but this one I was like, nailed a lot of this. So you also write, you reassure readers in the book, if self-awareness can do so much, literally transforming everyday life, why don't we know about its power already? And then you go on and say, the answer's simple. You actually have been using self-awareness all your life, but you've been underusing it. So tell us, how did we grow that self-awareness?
Are you Finding this conversation interesting.
Yes.
A little more enthusiasm. Okay. Now, let me ask you the same question. Are you finding this conversation interesting? But don't answer the question till I raise my hand. Everybody clear on that? So then when I raise my hand, you can say yes enthusiastically, as you did before. Are you finding this conversation interesting?
Who didn't understand the rules?
I'll repeat it. Don't answer my question till I raise my hand. Are you finding this conversation interesting?
Yes.
So my question is a mental event. My question is a mental event. Your answer is a mental event. In between is what we call awareness or consciousness. Between every mental event, there's a being, what we call awareness, spirit, soul, whatever you want to call it. So all our minds are different because we are conditioned differently. Went to different schools, saw different movies, heard different songs, knelt at different graves. We were conditioned by our culture, by our religion. So we have different minds. But there's a common ground that's called spirit or awareness. And without it, there's no mental experience. So let me ask you the question again. Is this interesting? Don't answer it. Just slip into it. Do you feel a presence? That presence is your soul. It was the same when you were a baby. Different mind, different body. Same when you were a teenager. Same when you were an adult. Everything is changing. Your mind is changing. Your body is changing. Your emotions are changing. Sometimes you get stuck and then you can run for office, but that's different. Okay. But everything in the relative world changes. But the presence in which all that happens, we call it I. Not I am Deepak. I am Deepak is already the mind. Okay, but when we shift into that presence, we're in the same place. And that place is the source of intuition, insight, imagination, creativity, higher consciousness, and transcendence. So we don't, the machine can't give you self-awareness, but the machine can direct you in the direction of self-awareness. Only you can be aware of you. And the machine is not aware. But given all the knowledge, it can give you the tools to get them.
That's great. We were talking backstage about meditation. I hadn't realized you studied or knew the Maharishi, but I've been practicing TM for about 6 years now, and I was drawn to it because people like Jerry Seinfeld and Howard Stern and creative people, David Lynch, who seem really normal and not gurus, no offense, but they were just like, I don't know, normal people doing stuff, but they happen to do TM. I thought, that could be great. So I kind of got into it and studied and been doing it for those years. You outline the benefits of any type of meditation. There's many types, not just TM, which include improved mental health, enhanced concentration, better sleep, and increased well-being. There's empirical data that supports all this too. Of course, the biggest hurdle or dilemma with meditating is finding the time and committing to the practice. I thought this was a great example of how AI can assist you. Because you said, this is a great line, you said, I love when you said, over the years I've heard many people say, oh, I'll sit down and meditate when I feel I have the need, which is a very funny thing because it's after the fact. So how do some of these tools help us? Because that really is something that could help be your coach or your guru, as you call it at certain times.
So like you, my first introduction to meditation was TM, which is a mantra practice. And I became very close to Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, who brought it to the world and to the West. So one day, and this is in the 70s, we were at Harvard, and everybody was talking about stress. And after they were all left, all the researchers and scientists, he called me and he whispered in my ear, "What are they talking about?" I said, "They're talking about stress." Now, here's a monk from the Himalayas, and he doesn't understand what that means. So he said, "What is stress?" I said, "It's the perception of threat, physical threat, psychological threat, financial threat." He still didn't get it, And he thought for a bit, and then he said, "You mean resistance to existence?"
That's a good one.
And I was totally blown away by that, because what is the opposite of resistance to existence is what we call flow. Okay, when you don't resist, now you flow. And in that flow experience is everything: insight, intuition, creativity, everything. So I realized that, we were so, in this Western world, we're so used to stress that we think that's how it should be.
Yeah.
But then I expanded my interest in meditation beyond TM and mantra, which I still do, but also into reflective inquiry. Who am I? What do I want? What is my purpose? What am I grateful for? So that's called self-reflection. And then I expanded to what people these days call mindfulness. So you can be aware of being aware, as you were a moment ago when I said, "Are you finding this interesting?" You became aware. But then you can take that awareness and put it on any experience. So last week, New York City, 2,000 people in Bryant Park. And, in New York, everybody complains about noise. Sirens, ambulances, traffic, horns. So I took 2,000 people into every sound that New York City was giving us at that moment, said, "Listen to this, listen to this, put your awareness on this." And, New York, the cacophony of sounds, and believe me, 2,000 people at the end of the meditation thought New York City sounds were like a symphony. Okay, when you put attention on anything, awareness, it becomes beautiful. And the great sages said, when you put attention on anything, put your attention on this chair without judgment, it suddenly looks beautiful. You put your attention on a person, awareness, that's called love. So love, beauty, and truth go together. There's a Sanskrit phrase, Satyam, Shivam, Sundaram. That's mindfulness. Mindfulness of sound, mindfulness of taste, mindfulness of smell, mindfulness of sensory experience, mindfulness of what's happening in your body, what's happening in your heart, what's happening in your mental space, what's happening in the universe. So mindfulness became a passion of mine. Reflection, and then mantra practice, transcendence, and something called introspection, where you learn to tap into the wisdom of your body. All of that is now available. In fact, you can go again on digitaldeepak.ai and say, "I want a mindfulness meditation for love. I'm having a difficult time with my relationship." And it'll pull out the right meditation, because, we are basically, what AI is doing is helping us stand on the shoulders of people who have come before us and contributed so much.
That's fascinating. And you were saying backstage when I was asking about your tool that it's based on all of your collective writings too. So this is not just the world, this is basically anything.
If you go to my digital twin, it will not hallucinate, because it's not a search engine. It goes through 95 of my books and then all my talks. Like if this talk was being filmed, which I presume it will, it'll pick it up.
We're going to be on there.
So it'll pick this up, add it to the repertoire.
Great.
And if you have questions, that will be added too.
Perfect. Well, you mentioned intuition in the last two comments you were making. So at one point you asked Gemini, one of the other AI chatbots, to explain trusting one's intuition. And the chatbot asked you, it gave you three questions. What are the physical sensations or emotions that accompany your intuition? When you have ignored your intuition, what were the consequences? And how can you create a more mindful space to get your intuition to be heard? Each of these self-reflective questions goes into more detail. I've heard a lot of discussion about the lack of our trusting. I just had this conversation with my wife and with some friends recently about the lack of trusting our natural intuitions. A good example is, you remember Gavin de Becker's book, The Gift of Fear, and these things that are naturally imbued in oneself, we would think. Are we evolving or de-evolving on understanding our intuitions?
Well, if we are distracted, then we are de-evolving. But if we are aware, then we are evolving. So, right now the world is chaotic. There's no question. There's a lot of divisiveness. There's a lot of violence. There's a lot of ethnocentrism and racism. All of that is there. We can't deny it. And you can't change other people. Notwithstanding what you might say logically, people go with their conditioned mind. So no one changes. The only person that can change is you. But if enough of, and there's a whole section on change over there, but if enough of us are at peace, the world will be peaceful. Peace is not created by peace Nobel laureates. I've met a lot of them. They're very angry, some of them. Okay? So peace can't be created by peace activists. Love can't be shared by those who don't know how to love or haven't received love. So if we want to change the world, as Mahatma Gandhi said, we have to be the change we want to see in the world. And if enough of us change, we could theoretically have a peaceful, just, sustainable, healthier and joyful world. So for me, this now is an added tool to reach a critical mass for peace and justice and health and joy and love.
That's wonderful. That's a wonderful sentiment. A lot of what you talk about in the book is living in the present and how we're dealing with things in the past. You write, everyone's life is overshadowed by the past. Whether you see this as a good thing or a bad thing doesn't obscure the fact that following the lessons of the past make it impossible to live in the present. Only by living in the present can you find your true self. And I think it's the last decade or so, we're at a different speed of how we consume things and what we see things. I think it's the constant amount of information, the various social media streams. There's something about a different time we live. The popular meme you see on Instagram is always, it's January, but it feels like December or something, meaning the world is working at a different pace. What do you think about that, about the time we live in and how to actually live in the present?
If there was one phrase to sum up what's happening in the world, collectively, we have sacrificed ourselves for our selfies.
For our what?
Selfies.
For us, oh, yeah.
We don't know what the self is. We only know what our self-image is. Okay, how many people like me, how many people validate me, how many this. And that's created a huge, neurosis in the world. So presence is the only thing that can change. Even the present moment is a kind of a misnomer. Presence is not in time. See, when I ask you, be aware of yourself, slip into that space, that presence has no form. Spirit has no form. And because it has no form, it has no borders. And because it has no borders, it's infinite. And because it's infinite, it's timeless. So every religious tradition has said, your soul lives forever. Now, people kind of say, oh yeah, how do I know? Well, that which you call I am is not in time. That presence is not in time. As I said, it was there when you were a baby. It's there now. And because it transcends time, it's the infinite in every finite experience. This is a finite experience. This is a finite experience. But what is experiencing this is infinite. That has to be a regular experience. And then you'll realize that what we call God or the divine is not difficult to find. It's impossible to avoid. There's no experience that you can have without being present to it.
That's great. That was beautiful. Yeah, there's 2 pages in the book. I can't remember where you were talking about. You almost don't exist. I bookmarked it to tell my son this at some point because it's a really interesting part about you're all molecules, how you're moving and what you're doing, and you basically we're not really here right now. So.
Yeah, that's what, there's a poem of Rumi, the Sufi poet. He says, in truth we are not here.
There you go.
In truth we are not here. Life is behind the curtain. This is our shadow. And this is what every spiritual tradition has said. Wittgenstein, German philosopher, he said, we are asleep, our life is a dream, but once in a while, we wake up enough to know that we are dreaming. So if I ask you, what happened to your childhood? You'd say, it's a dream. But what about yesterday? It's a dream. What about this morning? It's a dream. What about when you came into this room? It's now a dream. What about these words? By the time you hear them, they don't exist. So everything that we experience as everyday reality is a lucid dream in timeless now. This is a dream. Okay? When you wake up from this dream, then you say, wow, it's my destiny to play an infinity of roles, but I'm not the roles I'm playing. Like, great Shakespearean actors in the old days, if you did Shakespeare, one day you could be Cleopatra, the next day Mark Antony, the next day Julius Caesar. So we are like that. We are in this stage right now in a dreamscape, and the role we are playing is a fictional character. It's not us. This is a fictional, it's a story. Okay. Who or what knows the story or is experiencing the story is the great mystery. If you look at religious traditions, by the way, these days it's very fashionable, especially among young people. I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual. It sounds cool. Yes. I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual. But the religious experience is the spiritual experience. And it is only 3 things. Only 3 things. Number 1, getting in touch with your soul, your spirit. Number 2, the spontaneous emergence of what are called platonic values: truth, goodness, beauty, harmony, love, compassion, joy, equanimity. And number 3, the loss of the fear of death, because your true self is not subject to death. Only your experiences in the dreamscape are subject to death. So that's Jesus Christ, that's Buddha, that's Rumi, that's Muhammad. You say, what did they experience? Instead of, listening to a dogma, a theology, or a philosophy, even religion is a system of thought. No system of thought can give you access to reality. You have to have the experience. And what is the experience? Where does thought come from? It comes from that non-local awareness, which is outside of space and time.
It's wonderful. You fold Eastern and Western religions. You're very soft-handed. You never overstep in a way. I found that to be as a reader of the book. And you write about both Eastern and Western religious approaches throughout the book. On the subject of deeper self-awareness that you're talking about, you write, the East-West divide isn't as strict as it might seem. The New Testament contains the teaching that the kingdom of heaven is within. And then you also quote Rumi from the East, who says, you are not a drop in the ocean, you are the entire ocean in one drop, which is exactly what you're talking about. So, well said. Let's go. I want to get to all my negative questions about where we're living as a society, and you're raising us up, so I'll bring us down for a minute. The talk about that talk about selfies. So we're in Los Angeles, the land of excess, and so you write about ego and the I, and you ask ChatGPT to explain this connection between ego and desire, because there's a lot of discussion about desire and excess in the book. Desire, so ChatGPT says, desire, whether for things or ideas, creates a cycle of longing and dissatisfaction, causing suffering. By letting go of these desires, these traditions teach us when we weaken the ego's hold and find peace, aiming it for liberation from the constant chaos of fulfillment. I was thinking back, 30 years ago we had Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous, glossy magazines, the occasional 20/20 piece where you went into someone's home with Barbara Walters. We're now living in a world where 24/7 there is excess in travel, food, posts, selfies, events. It's always the best of the best. I mean, how do you come to a decision on where we're at if that's what's coming at us at all times? That's the reason for these selfies, I'm thinking.
So let's say you have the best health. Let's say you have the best relationships. Let's say you have all the money in the world. There still will come a time when there's old age, there's some infirmity, and then there's the chapter that we call death. Okay, nobody can avoid that. Old age, infirmity, death. Or illness or crisis in the family, whatever. But that leads to what is called existential suffering. Not suffering because you don't have enough money or because you're in the midst of a divorce. You have all of that, but you begin to wonder what's going on. And this is also in spiritual traditions called the dark night of the soul. So in Christianity, if you want to know about dark night of the soul, you read San Juan de la Cruz, St. John of the Cross, who actually went across the dark night of the soul. I'm digressing a little bit.
Please.
In Christianity, there are 3 pivotal moments in Jesus' life where he goes through the dark night of the soul. He's carrying the cross to his execution, and Joseph of Arimathea, he falters. He's going to fall, and Joseph of Arimathea, he tries to help him, and Jesus turns to him and says, "I have to carry my own cross." All of us have to carry our own cross at some point. The second episode is when he's about to be crucified, and he looks at, metaphorically, up the heavens, and he says to God, "Why did you desert me?" Okay. And then the third point is when he says, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do." That's the 3 things we have to go through, okay? We have to carry our own cross. We have moments of doubt, but in the end, there's forgiveness, self-forgiveness, and forgiveness of the other, because we are all doing the best we can from the state of consciousness we are in. That is the death and the resurrection. Okay, death of an old story, an old paradigm, old context. And that is essentially the religious experience. Now, in Eastern philosophies, they go into great details of this. They say we have 5 causes of existential suffering. The first is not knowing fundamental reality, because this, what we are experiencing, is a projection of something deeper. So that's the first cause, not knowing reality. The second is clinging and grasping to experiences that are ungraspable. If I ask you, can you cling to this experience? No, it'll be over. In an hour, it's gone. You cannot cling or hold on to any experience. The third is recoiling from experiences that are ungraspable. The fourth is confusing yourself with your ego, yourself with your selfie.
Yep.
And the fifth is the fear of death. And the cure for all this is finding out who you are beyond social constructs. And that produces joy. Every baby that's born, by the way, is like that. They're already enlightened. They're joyful, they're happy, they're loving, They have empathy, they have compassion, they are spontaneously loving, and then we impose constructs on them. We call it education.
These are the levels of awareness, and then you talk about the unawareness and kind of the danger condition you can be in, about being unaware. So it's kind of the opposite of this higher path. And I made a note to myself not to get too political.
Practically, by the way, if you want to be aware, just stop every few hours and ask yourself, am I aware? That's all you have to do. As soon as you question, am I aware, you become aware. And then you can go further. What am I aware of? My body, my feelings, my emotions, the five senses, these thoughts. But all these come and go. I'm still there.
It almost seems like, again, I won't make this political, but there seems to be a condition. You've got some enlightened people, I bet, who really want to hear what you have to say and are enjoying this already, so they're your audience. But then there's a whole other part of the world where you write in the price of being unaware, you learn nothing about yourself. You start to lose interest in other people. You become incurious. You get more fixed and rigid in your ways. Old wounds continue to inflict pain. The past isn't healed. Entropy saps your mental and physical energy, and there's a sense that timing is running downhill. And I think that's become a badge of courage in parts of this country and parts of the political climate we're in, that to use that as a tool to say, I'm really proud I'm all those things, is a strange way to approach life.
We're at a crossroads. Either we are sleepwalking collectively to extinction, or we need to wake up. That's the choice right now.
I go for the good one. But this is all not real, so.
Yeah, but if this is an illusion, we might as well
This is
upgrade
one
it,
bad
right?
illusion, I almost swore.
Dreams can turn into nightmares. So when they turn into nightmares, you need to upgrade the dream.
You talk quite a bit about relationships between parents and couples and things. And in this chapter called Trust the Process, you refer to something people say, which is they say, I'm processing, which you note sounds less reactionary and less accusatory than, I'm still upset with you about what you did. As everyone knows what that means. This idea of processing, and later you talk about the process, which I found interesting when I had millennial employees who would say, you'd ask them to do something and it wouldn't be what you were looking for, but they'd say, well, that's part of my process. And that was a thing they would own to. So talk to us about this idea of processing, because you talk about how you're almost caught in time and you're not moving forward when you're processing.
It's the best way to process is before you react to anything, press the pause button and observe your reaction to react. I'll repeat that. Anytime you feel reactive, somebody says something mean to you, you get stuck in a traffic jam, somebody blows the horn, before you react, just press the pause button and observe your reaction to react. And the processing will happen spontaneously. The Buddhist ecosystem, they use something called the STOP formula. So S stands for stop. You're getting in a stressful place, S stands for stop. T stands for take 3 deep breaths and smile. O stands for observe. What do you observe? Your body. And then P stands for proceed with compassion and awareness. STOP. And that's processing.
I think that's a good method for anyone to employ, yes. As we evolve, I think we've all been involved with situations where I do artwork, so you're drawing and you don't do a certain kind of artwork, and you go back 5 years later and you're like, wow, I'm really good at this thing I wasn't doing all those years, and you're growing in the background whether you knew it or not in certain ways. And you write about the role of time, the importance of time. On the path you experience epiphany in slow motion, a steady unfolding occurs. Almost imperceptibly, you're transformed. And I like this idea that in a way, we're slowly working on ourselves, and sometimes we see that mirrored in others, or we come to a realization where we say, wow, I've actually grown as a person, so that's a positive.
That's positive. But you know, you have to realize you have to be patient. It takes a long time for a fruit to grow, but then one day it falls. So you have to keep at it. You have to encounter these dark moments. Everybody has them. And you have to recognize that at the end of the tunnel, there's always light. And if others have achieved enlightenment, you can too. And again, in the tradition that I come from, that's called yoga. There are 4 types of yoga. The first is the kind of yoga that you're all familiar with. People go do breathing exercises, they move their body, they learn how to concentrate, focus, this, that. That's called Raj Yoga. Then there's something called Bhakti Yoga, which is the yoga of love. So if you just make love the only reason for making choices, you don't have to think about anything. You will be supported by the laws of nature, because love is the ultimate truth at the heart of creation. So there's Raj Yoga, the physical aspects of yoga. There's the yoga of love. There's something called Karma Yoga, when you actually put love into action. So love without action is kind of meaningless. It's kind of mostly melodrama. And action without love is also irrelevant. When you act and love at the same time, you'll see the whole world supports you. So that's called Karma Yoga. And there's the 4th yoga, which is the yoga of the intellect, which is referred to as the razor's edge. Because the intellect tells us, I'm separate from you. I'm here, you're there, and we are separate. And that is referred to in yogic traditions, the mistake of the intellect. In the deeper reality, we are all the same spirit with different minds. And that is a difficult thing to understand for most people who haven't spent a lifetime investigating this. So if I asked you, where is this experience happening right now? You're seeing me, right? You can see me. Where is the seeing happening? Some people say it's happening in my eyes. Your eyes are 9 centimeters apart. They're 2.5 centimeters by 2.5 centimeters. By the time light gets into your eyes, it crosses through the optic nerves, and it flips, and it hits your retina. And if seeing was happening in the eyes, you should be seeing 2 of me upside down and curved. Well, obviously, seeing is not happening in the eyes. What's happening in the eyes? Electrochemistry. Some people said, okay, then it must be happening in my brain, in my optic. By the way, this is called the hard problem of consciousness, in case you haven't heard it. So, it's happening in my brain. Well, your brain is 10 centimeters by 12 centimeters. How does this room fit inside your brain? You go outside and look at the Milky Way galaxy, the sun and the moon and the stars. How does all that fit inside your brain? Your brain only shows electrochemistry. So then where is this conversation, this experience happening? It's happening in your consciousness. They say, where is that consciousness? I can't see it. Well, you can't see it because it doesn't have a form. Okay? If it had a form, you'd be able to see it. But without it, there's no seeing. So this experience is happening in a formless consciousness outside of space and time. This is a mind-boggling idea that if people really understood this, then we are all in the same place before space and time becomes an experience. That's called the intellectual way to get beyond the mistakes of the intellect. And the Upanishads say that's the razor's edge. You could go either way. So it's only a motley group of sages, psychotics, and geniuses who make it all the way. You have to be a psychotic, or you have to be a genius, or you have to be a sage.
We've got time.
Otherwise, you're bamboozled by the box. You think you're an entity that's squeezed into the volume of a body and the span of a lifetime. And that creates all the existential suffering that we have.
There's a plug for a great movie if you've ever seen The Razor's Edge with Bill Murray, where he seeks out the Upanishads.
Yes, and that was based on a book by Somerset Maugham.
Yeah, it's
Well, it's
kind of beautiful. I mean, sure it's
classic.
dated, but I rewatched
Oh
it.
yeah,
pretty
The
beautiful.
Razor's Edge, one of my favorite
Oh, good.
books.
That could have gone awry. He could've-
When I read that when I was in medical school,
Yeah.
I said, we don't learn in medical school how to alleviate suffering. We actually prolong it. And that changed me drastically.
That's good to hear. Then we're going to do two more last questions. So one was, I told you backstage, I typically have 20 questions, and I was at 19, and I'm thinking about one more. So I went to your AI twin, and I wrote, this morning I visited your digital AI twin and asked the following question. Quote, I'm going to interview you today on stage. Is there anything special, and is there any special question you'd like me to ask? And you answered, which you almost answered it just now. You could, quote, Deepak's AI twin, you could ask, as a man of science, how do you reconcile your beliefs with irrefutable scientific data? The question often arises, and I believe it's important to address. You feel like you covered most of that just now?
I think we covered, but I just want to add one thing. No system of thought, whether it's science, philosophy, religion, or mythology, can give you access to truth. It can point the way. Even AI can point the way, but you have to do the work. You have to be self-aware. And the miracle of the machine is, without being self-aware, it can direct you to self-awareness.
Yeah, I mean, I'll close with a sentence towards the end of your book, and then we'll open up to questions. You write, if AI has the power to shift reality, as everyone keeps insisting, then it should shape it to restore humanity to the stature of co-creator. So it's everything you're talking about. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. Try out tonight before you go to sleep. Ask a question of
Yeah,
my
we're gonna do some
digital twin.
First question comes from Carla, who says, Dr. Chopra, I am struggling with this. It seems to me that AI and more technology in my daily routines, especially in my phone, seems like the antithesis to being present and soulful and mindful and supporting a real human connection. Help me out.
So listen, we discovered fire. Fire could burn a forest, but without fire you couldn't have cooking, or thousands of years later, the steam engine, without which we wouldn't have the industrial age. We discovered tools like knives. You can kill a person with a knife, but in a surgeon's hand, you can heal it. We discovered a hammer, which can be used for carpentry or artistic work, or you can knock somebody on the head. Between the period 1887 to 1903, 25 years, 24, 25 years, we discovered the light bulb, the automobile, the airplane, and a telephone. So if you died in 1886, you would have no idea what a baby would be born to 25 years later. So every time there's a new technology, and this is to be human, by the way, is to be a tool maker. Started with stone tools and knives and this and that, and now we have AI. If you do not use technology, first of all, recognize once technology is born, it's irreversible. It's like a baby that's born, can't go back to the womb. So either you adapt or you become extinct. That's the history of humanity. When I came to the United States in 1970, I'm, by the way, 78 this month, although, yeah, thank you. I'm talking chronologically,
You
not
could run for
biologically.
president, right, exactly.
That's right. So when I came to the United States, I had not seen a TV set in my life. I was shocked that there were people in the box, okay? And then we had fax machines. The internet is only 1991. Okay, social media, and then you had, all this, now we have all this other stuff, internet. And so recognize that as humans, we have two attributes. One is we are storytellers, And 2 is we are tool makers. And technology is part of human evolution. And every time there's a new technology, people are scared. I'll share you a story with you. You know, when the computer first came out, I bought a nice computer with a printer, and I took it to India for my dad. My dad was a very sophisticated scientist. He was a cardiologist. He graduated from the Royal School of Cardiology in England. He was a physician to the Queen who just died. So I showed him how to use the computer. I said, this is email, this is a printer, you can do all this. So I could leave him with the computer. I come back to the United States. 2 weeks later, I get a mail, and in the mailbox is an envelope. He printed out the email, he put it in an envelope, he put it in the post office,
yeah.
And then what he said to me is, this email thing is fantastic. So when something new comes out and it's totally alien, it can be scary. So I totally understand the question.
Shonda asks, is there or will there ever be AI consciousness?
What?
Is there or will there ever be AI consciousness?
No. AI will never be conscious. It'll never have hunger or sexual urges or fear death. Everything that makes us conscious is subjectivity. So even with soon we are going to have what they call general intelligence, AI, is still contextual and relational and information-based. It cannot be conscious. Only we can be conscious.
Hi, Dr. Chopra. I asked you this question 25 years ago. I'm asking you again. It's easier to think of self-duplicating molecules that evolved into various life forms. What is the origin of consciousness? You refer to this as a hard problem of consciousness. Do you have anything to say now?
So your question is about self-replicating molecules, right?
And he asked you the same question 25 years ago, you said, I think.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes, and
what,
now he's asking you.
exactly what the
He
question?
wasn't happy with your answer 25 years.
Yeah, but what is the question right now?
What is the origin of
What is
consciousness?
the origin of consciousness?
What's the biological basis of consciousness?
It's because of your mask. I'm so sorry, sir. Ted, can you tell him? Yeah.
What is the origin of consciousness? What's the biological basis of consciousness?
Okay, so consciousness makes experience possible, number one. How do you define consciousness? Consciousness is that in which all experience occurs. This experience is happening in consciousness. Consciousness is also that in which all experience is known. We are also experiencing, but we know we are experiencing. And finally, consciousness is that out of which all experience is made. So, where is consciousness? And I said it's formless. And if it's formless, it's without cause. It has no origin. It has no origin. It's without cause, spaceless, timeless, infinite, incomprehensible, unimaginable, and non-conceptual. So consciousness is the non-conceptual, imperceivable element that makes every conception and perception possible. And it's being outside of space-time, it has no cause. And this is actually today, it's also called quantum entanglement. And when you actually understand quantum entanglement, there's no cause and effect. There's just pure spontaneous creativity. And it's spontaneous. If you replace the word, if I asked you what is this, you know, because we are all kind of bamboozled by social constructs, you'd say this is a glass of water, right? If I asked you what is this, you'd say this is a hand. But now let's pretend you're a baby and you have no idea what social constructs are. And you're looking at my shoes, you don't know that's a shoe. It's not an object, it's a color. And where is that color happening? In your consciousness. So the only difference between this and this is color. And without color, there's no shape. Without shape, there's no form. And without form, there's no visual experience. So consciousness modifies itself into experience, and in order to do that, it has to split into subject and object. It knows itself as the observer and the observed. And it creates the illusion of a theater of space-time and causality. But consciousness is beyond space-time and causality. To ask what is the origin, how do you ask the infinite what is the origin? It's the infinite in every finite experience, and it's incomprehensible. This is Adi Shankara. If you can see it, touch it, taste it, smell it, imagine it, conceptualize it, it's not real. The only thing that's real is the inconceivable and the imperceivable. And you are that. You are nothing that can be conceived or perceived, but without you, there's no perception of the body, there's no experience of the mind, and there's no experience of the world. So consciousness transcends space-time and causality and projects the theater of space-time and causality. That's pure Advaita. There's no biological basis of consciousness. Biology is an experience in consciousness. That's the whole problem with modern science. It assumes that biology comes first and consciousness is an emergent property. But in order to experience your biology, you have to have consciousness. So your biology is an experience in consciousness.
Thank you.
Since we are creating our own stories, and the stories create our experience of life, and this is well known, why are we creating stories in which we are killing each other and there's war? And is there possibly a way of using AI to find ways to break through those stories and transform them, through leadership?
Did you hear everything?
Yeah, so since we're choosing to tell stories, why are we making stories about war and killing each other and doing things? Because we're writing our own future. Can we use AI to change that discussion? And I think
we could use AI to change that discussion, but remember, if consciousness is infinite, then it has infinite expressions, both divine and diabolical and everything in between. And all experiences by contrast. You can't have an up without a down. You can't have pleasure without pain. You can't have birth without death. So you can't have hot without cold. You cannot have peace. You wouldn't know what peace is if there wasn't something different. Now, throughout history, evolution goes through these phases where entropy is dominant and then everything seems like it's going to fall apart. But then evolution takes over and always keeps a little ahead. Always keeps a little ahead. That's why there's evolution. That's the meaning of the word evolution. So entropy is punctuated by evolution. And there's something called phase transition. I believe that's what's happening right now. Phase transition is when, say, water turns into steam. A lot of turbulence. But then steam and the turbulence is gone. I hope that's where we are.
We have time for a couple more questions. Carlos asks, what happens after death?
Oh, that's an easy one. Do you want me to take? You'll take that. He's going to take that. There is no death. Did you not listen to the conversations?
Okay, let me give an answer that might help, okay?
Okay, let's see.
What happens to the space in this room if the building collapses? The answer is nothing. Okay, the space cannot be created or destroyed. Let's say you and I are on a Zoom call and the network fails. What happens to you and me? We're still there, but we're not having the experience anymore. Okay? Now, here's another way to understand it. I won't ask him because, I'll ask you and then everybody can. What did you have for lunch today?
A hamburger.
Hamburger.
I feel guilty.
Okay. No, but it's
I
fine.
wanted I wanted energy for this.
Yeah. So if and as soon as
I
you,
ate a salad. Yeah.
okay, but as soon as I say that, ask you the question, you have an experience. You can
Yes.
see the salad, you can imagine it, you can remember the taste, who you were with. Okay? Now let me ask you another question. Do you remember any incident from your teenage years?
Sure.
Something.
Yes.
Okay. Do you remember any incident from your childhood?
Yes.
Your parents, your toys?
Yeah.
So where was that information before I asked you the question? If I go into your brain, there's no picture of a salad, and there's no picture of your teenage years and your classroom and your toys. But it was there somewhere. And what we are discovering through neuroscience, and that's called the hard problem of consciousness, was there is no memory in the brain, okay? The memory is actualized by the brain. Just like when you're listening to Beethoven on the radio, there's no Beethoven inside the radio, okay? Or you're watching, these days you're watching movies on a screen. You have Netflix, you have CNN. In fact, you can have almost an infinite number of programs, but it's all the screen. And it's the screen that modifies itself into digital bits that appear as the program. So where do we go after we die? It's where that burger was before I asked you the question, okay? Or where that childhood scenery was. In other words, you don't go anywhere, you're there now. You cannot have any experience of memory or imagination without retrieving it from your soul. And your soul is not subject to birth and death. What is subject to birth and death are experiences. A baby, a teenager. You say, I have a body. Which one? You were a fertilized egg, you were a zygote, you were a baby. And what we call as the body is not a thing. It's an activity in consciousness that has a beginning, a middle, and an end. But like the screen on a TV set, the movies will come and go, but the screen is ever the same. That's a metaphor, okay? Or when you look at a wave on the ocean, you see it looks separate from the ocean in the moment you see it. But it is the ocean. And so you are, we quoted Rumi, you're not just a drop in the ocean, you're the ocean in the drop. The drop will become a rainbow, it'll become a cloud, it'll become a glacier, it'll become a puddle, it will become a river, it will become a rivulet, it will become a whirlpool, but all the time it is water. It doesn't lose its wateriness. And the screen is the constant in all these programs. So when you stop identifying yourself with your programs, go to the source of the programs, then you say, oh, I'm already there. You know, when you ask enlightened people in the Buddhist tradition, where do you go after you die? They say, I was never born. So there's no question of death.
I'm allowed to do an official follow-up. One of the things is so much of this is contingent on language. I mean, everything, you're an eloquent speaker, but it's this, I always love the Heidegger talking about the jugness of the jug, and when you name something, you bring it into being, so when the child knows that's a red shoe, now they're going to know what a red shoe is. Until then, it's a blob they didn't understand.
Your fundamental being is nothing nameless or conceptual or perceptual. That's why we stumble with words. And that's why the religious experience is more important than the religious ideology. Right. You said Jesus had this experience, so Muhammad is sitting in the cave and the angel Gabriel appears to him, says recite, and suddenly he downloads the whole Quran in poetry. And he's illiterate, he doesn't know how to read or write. Right. So all that we know in words is a very poor semblance of the infinite.
Yeah. I was wondering, because as someone who speaks many languages probably, but at least in Indian language and in English, there's got to be a differentiation of how you
Absolutely.
take things, because
There are words that are not translatable. And so when they say the word, first there was the word, it was made into flesh. That's actually true, not metaphorically. As soon as we created words,
flesh exists.
then we created this whole thing.
That's great.
Thank you so much. I feel like you simplify such intense concepts. And so my question for you was, you were talking about the 4 levels of awakening maybe, like starting at Dharma, ending at moksha. Could you give some insight into what transitions you from Dharma to the next level on up into the moksha, and then the qualities or maybe the experiences of what moksha might feel or look like?
Moksha is translated into freedom from suffering, number 1, and freedom from all constructs. It is knowing yourself is the infinite, which cannot be squeezed into the volume of a body or the span of a lifetime. Now, as I said, it happens sometimes to sages, and sometimes to psychotics, and sometimes to geniuses. But again, in the tradition I come from, there are 4 phases of life, okay? And they're called ashramas. So, and they're divided into 25 periods, years. So the first 25 years, the ashram is education. The second 25 years is material success, artha, which also means fame, fortune, or, making money. That's up to 50 years. The third phase, the third ashram, is giving back, 50 years to 75. And the final ashram, which I'm in, is self-realization. So there's a process. So this is my time to actually say, been there, done that. Next chapter.
3 years ago, you stopped giving back.
The next chapter is the final chapter, which is the mystery of death. And that's something that I pursue every day. Before I sleep, I imagine my death, and I imagine what's the lokas and the bardos, and I've come to the conclusion there's no such thing. The dream never ends. You move from one dream to another, to another, to another. But you have to realize what or who the dreamer is, and it's the infinite in you that is the dreamer.
Wonderful.